Welcome to the Cinematologist podcast. I'm Dario Linares, and down the line, of course, is my good friend Neil Fox. Neil, good to see you after quite a little bit of time, really.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, I was wondering if you'd be able to remember, or if I'd be able to remember the name of and the introduction to the podcast. But the muscle memory,
It's there.
the muscle memory was there. This feels like the longest break we've had that wasn't a sort of summer term or a winter break.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Because I think, well, with these episodes that are coming up, there's 3 coming up now that are all sort of, they're linked to dates, aren't they? So it's one of those things. And then obviously, it's funny, you make that decision and you say, oh, should we just sit down and record something? But we were both like super busy, I think, over the last month. So it's, yeah, it is what it is in that sense. But we can get these 3 ones out over the next few weeks, which I'm really looking forward to. Anything that you've been doing or watching that you want to report on before we get into the main gist of what we're talking about today?
Yeah, so I've been so super busy. I had a conference that I was organising, and then and I watched a little bit for that, including Andrea Arnold's Bird, which I really liked. And yeah, because we had a keynote from Alice Pember, who was talking about the dancing girl in British cinema with a particular focus on Andrea Arnold, which is a brilliant keynote. And yeah, I just really enjoyed that film in terms of its representation of fatherhood, which I thought was kind of interesting in social realism. And then the magic realist element I thought was really, kind of beautifully handled. So that was great. The other thing I'm doing, which is on the opposite end of the spectrum, is I'm rewatching all the Mission Impossibles.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Before I see the last one, last-ish, last one with an asterisk. But that's been really interesting in terms of realizing how I didn't really appreciate the auteurist nature of the first couple and how refreshing it was to watch films that were authored visually.
Yeah.
Particularly De Palma's, which I think is still, I think it's exquisite now in a way.
Oh, it just owns, doesn't it? It's so good.
Yeah, and but a lot of it's to do with his visual approach to it, and I never was a huge John Woo fan, but it was kind of enjoyable to watch a John Woo movie in the Mission Impossible.
Yeah, that kind of falls down on 2 things, on the narrative and on the baddie. I don't think Dougray Scott particularly is great in that role.
Yeah, and I noticed that the first one is authored by, screenwritten by David Koepp and Robert Towne.
Oh, yeah.
Which I think is a great combination because David Koepp's amazing. And then the next one's just Robert Towne, which I think there's a lack of narrative discipline, which is quite similar. The other thing I've noticed, which I'm sure it's been written about somewhere, but I've never really picked up on, and it's watching it in very close succession, is how much of a romantic Ethan Hunt is. These are all kind of really romantic films in terms of what's at stake for him personally. Yeah. In everything, or in the case of Ghost Protocol, which I love. Ghost Protocol, actually rewatching it. Yeah. Is like this, the absence of the wife, and there's a real kind of heartbreak, and it seems like he's just driven to do everything because of a single female that he's kind of obsessed with.
But it's funny how the later ones become kind of asexualized with him. It's kind of like, even the Rebecca Ferguson, there's the kind of will they, won't they thing, and they never really do,
No, and it's a shame, I think, because I think it lends such a nice dynamic, and it makes those portrayals in a way that when you're watching it thinking about Bond, they're really, so yeah, it's really enjoyable, and the leap between 3 and 4, like between the Philip Seymour Hoffman one and then Ghost Protocol, it's just like there's at least 8 films that needed to have been made in between those to explain stuff, but I love that. What about you?
No. Really good. I haven't watched them all, but I've watched them all plenty of times. So I'm interested to talk to you about the last one, actually, because now, having seen them all, it's going to be that's actually going to set you up quite well for the last one, I think. But I think I'll leave it there. So I watched Parthenope, or Parthenope, I should say. Parthenope is the way you. So this is Paolo Sorrentino, who I love as a director in terms of the Great Beauty. I just think he's a wonderful film. But this is him in kind of like unashamed romanticization of youth sort of mode. He's got this actress who's absolutely stunning, Celeste Dalla Porta, who plays this character who kind of like mesmerizes everyone. She walks into a room and like just everything stops kind of thing. And it's this whole idea of somebody kind of dealing with their own understanding of their own agency and being able to kind of cope, or how does somebody who's like that deal with understanding themselves when all they see is the reflection of what other people are seeing, and I mean it I can see where the criticism is going to come, where it's just this sort of old auteur kind of getting off on the idea of youthful beauty and desirousness, and it's kind of levacious in certain regards, but I think it undercuts it in a way that's kind of entertaining. I mean, I enjoyed it while it was on, that's for sure. And Gary Oldman plays a sort of Sorrentino surrogate, and they have this sort of interplay with the and he's the wise old figure who's saying, enjoy your youth because it's not going to last and you're going to have to change. And he says things like, she says to him, will you walk me home? And he says things like, I don't want to deny you 1 second of your youth, kind of thing, So there's a lot of that kind of stuff going on, and it's got all of the eccentric characters, like in a Fellini movie. But it's kind of fundamentally about the idea that beauty is everything until it's not.
Yeah.
And there's a sort of irony and a tragedy behind that, and how this particularly, obviously this woman kind of creates her own agency, even though she doesn't know what to do with this reaction that she inspires in people. So I enjoyed it, but I can see it's not perfect by any means, and it will really rub some people up the wrong way. The other thing I've been watching, interestingly enough, is Andor, the TV series. So we've tried. B is a big Star Wars fan, and we've tried to watch some of the series and just never got into them, like The Mandalorian and the Ben Kenobi. Well, I think it's called Kenobi, isn't it? And they just become very cartoonish and child friendly to me, and I just kind of like, this is just not sophisticated enough. But actually, once you get past the first sort of 2 or 3 setup episodes, and they're very short, they're like half an hour, I really started enjoying this, because it's about the sort of political machinations behind the empire, and them trying to deal with the rebellion on all of these different planets, and these characters that are a long way away from Luke Skywalker and what have you. So it's as close to kind of adult Star Wars as there is. And Diego Luna in it is really watchable. I always think, well, what an interesting career he's had since Y Tu Mama Tambien. And then Adria Arjona is in it, who's who's the girl in Hitman, who's very watchable as well.
Yeah, for sure,
for her own reasons. But we won't go in that direction too far. I'll get cancelled.
Won't go too Sorrentino on that.
Yeah, that's it. Maybe so, but middle-aged white straight man, you're not allowed to express any kind of desirous thought ever, But yeah, the thing that turned me onto it, because I was listening to an interview with Tony Gilroy, who basically was given carte blanche. It seems the way he was talking was like, you can do whatever you want, and he was talking about being really interested in sort of showing the anatomy of a rebellion. And it's got a lot of that in it. It's really, really interesting, and a nice sort of balance between sort of the politics that are going on between all of these characters, and then the sort of action CGI. It doesn't overdo that, and it's quite subtle in the layering of the Star Warsiness on top of it, if you see what I mean. So I'm actually quite enjoying it, interestingly enough.
Lovely. Yeah, I think I might watch that, because I think that I watched Skeleton Crew, which I wrote about in the newsletter, and it was that one Andor have been the things that people have suggested, and for those reasons that you've said. So I'm glad to hear that you've enjoyed it. And one of the things I enjoyed about Skeleton Crew was, I think I mentioned it, like it felt very Amblin. It felt very, very much like Goonies and kind of like those 80s stuff, but in a way that kind of owned it. So it was very much about the kids,
Right, okay.
Rather than doing that thing which Marvel does a lot, and which other Star Wars stuff I've seen does a lot, which is like pretend that it's not for kids, but really it's for that. So it's kind of like, oh, this is just a family-friendly show with Jude Law being really cheesy. So, and I think Andor's got a similar kind of, it's actually got its own identity, rather than this kind of messy, what is it kind of thing. So that's cool.
Well, it fits in with that sentiment, I think, that a few people have, and I agree with that Rogue One, the film, is the best film outside of the sort of main films,
And that was Gilroy as well, was it? He wrote.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah. So that's good. Yeah, and the other thing, just quickly, was that I've had some interesting posts on Substack, and I had a note that went like mega viral out of nowhere. Nice. I mean, mega viral for an academic note that you just type out and not even think about it. It was really, really weird, and it's sort of it's made me think that there is this sort of space opening up in a kind of non-academic forum for film studies and for the interest in film studies and what it is and what it's actually trying to do, which is really kind of, I find it quite heartening, really, because, you know, we think about film studies, you know, almost innately now, you know what I mean? What it is and what are the constituent parts, what are the trajectories, what are the methodologies, all that kind of stuff. But yet then you forget that, academia is so bad at talking outside itself. And therefore, kind of on the back of that, there are so many people who are kind of interested, but like they're starting you know, they're interested in films and they talk about films and they've got strong opinions about films and they're literate in sort of reading what's going on, but they don't have that sort of scaffolding of you know, underpinning, and they're interested in sort of being educated in that. And it's, you know, it sounds a little bit sort of condescending, but you know what I mean? They sort of want to know where these things
learn,
come
like
from.
We all do. Yeah. Want to learn. It's not.
So it was kind of interesting to sort of see that happen in real time. You know,
exciting. That's really exciting. Yeah, and I'm glad that that's a response that is there. You know, and it's still there. And sort of continues to be there, particularly, I guess, with different people from different backgrounds and different different ages as well. I mean, and
it trebled my subscribers in like a week, which is like, I was like, this is crazy. But it's amazing how you get on a tiny little viral moment that you don't know why it happened, just causes that spike that you think, where did that come from? I've no idea, you know?
Yeah. Well, and it's another reminder, just you got to do what you believe in.
Yeah.
You know, you can't really think about impact or strategy in that sense. You just have to think, this is what I care about, and share it, and then and people respond to that a lot of the time. So cool. That's really cool.
So Neil, this is an episode that is based around an interview that you've done with a film that's coming out, and I'm really looking forward to it. Unfortunately, I haven't seen it because we had some link issues, but the interview's great, and I'm really looking forward to sort of having a quick chat about the filmmaker as well, because I think he's a great filmmaker.
Cool. Well, yeah, let's move into that part of it now. Then, this is a conversation between John Maclean and I regarding his new film Tornado, and his previous feature was Slow West from a number of years ago with Michael Fassbender and Ben Mendelsohn. And just once I saw that he had a new film out, I really wanted to talk to him because it's been such a long time, and just really, really love Slow West. So I reached out to him and said, would you want to come on and have a chat about this and just sort of filmmaking in general? And he did. And the film is out today. And I say today because after this, I'm going to edit it and get this episode out on. And so, to coincide with the release. I was in London recently, and there's posters for it everywhere. I'm hoping it's going to play in all the kind of the cinemas you'd expect. And if it does, get out and see it, because he has a very particular cinematic sensibility. And working with Robbie Ryan again around sort of people in landscape, I think some really beautiful stuff in here. So get out to see it. But let's head into the conversation now. So this is a conversation between myself and John Maclean.
What do you want?
It's blowing through.
Then keep on blowing.
Burn it down.
You showed up. Should I put you out of your misery? There's nothing of yours here. Tornado, listen to your father. 何があっても振り向くな。
Find her. Find her or I'll kill you.
My father is a samurai. You are your father's daughter. But am I a samurai? Am I a killer? You are Tornado.
Tornado. Never what I said.
戦いで生を望む者には死あるのみ。
That's my father's sword.
I will avenge my father. I will destroy you. I am Tornado. Remember my name.
Well, yeah, nice to talk to you. Thanks for joining us.
Nice to be here. Thank you.
I have to say, it was a real joy to see you had a new film coming out.
Yeah.
Because it's been a while since Slow West, and we don't have to go into the vagaries of funding British film.
Yeah.
It's really great to see you back with another film, particularly one which I think does, again, really interesting things with genre, which I did want to talk about as we go.
Yeah.
But to start with, obviously, that it says story with you and Kate Lees, is it? And so just wondered if you could just sort of start at the beginning, I guess, in terms of how this project evolved, where this idea comes from. Because I know it's quite a generic question, but I do have specifics that will come out, I think, in terms of.
I finished Slow West and then started thinking about doing this more or less straight away, writing the next script, blank piece of paper. I think I had a few false starts where I thought I was going to make, a different film, a different kind of film, and then that idea got so boring that I started saying to myself, I wish I was just making a samurai film. I'm more and more interested in, I was sort of watching more and more Kurosawa at the time and really wondering why Westerns and samurai films couldn't really exist in Britain or haven't really existed in Britain. And then, Kate Lees was the script editor I worked with with Slow West, but with Slow West, I'd kind of already had quite an outline before we started working together. But with Tornado, it was sort of blank page, and so working with her from the beginning, just I come up with the stuff, and she usually just tells me. She's almost like a guide, she's sort of story by is not really the right title, but it's kind of guides me through the story.
Nice.
And keeps me on track, and so that's a great collaboration. And then it was just slowly building it up. I knew that if I was going to do a samurai film, how could I approach it, because I'm not Japanese and I'm not gonna how could I find the truth in it, and that in the end that came partly from thinking, well, Slow West was a bunch of people from all over the world in America, and as it was. So it was a kind of an immigration story, really. And I thought, why don't I do the same to Britain? So there could be a Japanese samurai, a French weightlifter, a African bandit, So there was that idea. And then just slowly the idea that period dramas in Britain always seem to be kind of kings and queens and Brontes and, and I just wondered where's the outsiders? Where's the sort of the equivalent of the Western, and if it was a Western, when would that be set? When's the equivalent time when things are changing, and I thought 1790, before the Industrial Revolution, swords becoming guns, it seemed to be kind of similar to 1860s in America. So that all just sort of started coming together, and then the sort of final piece of the puzzle was just starting to build up the idea that this girl was, torn between her parents, her father's Japanese teaching and just wanting to be a young girl in Britain and a British girl. So, but just and then the father-son reflection in the baddies. Sorry, I'm going on, but
No, it's lovely. No, it's yeah.
the and I can relate to that. My dad sort of trying to teach me stuff when I was too young about Scottish culture, and so that became like the kind of the what it meant to me.
Yeah. Yeah. I noticed that sense of sort of the intergenerational shift, that's both in the kind of, and you got these two children of parents and they're both kind of pulling against. So I think it's a really kind of, touching film in that sense of kind of all the legacies of of parenthood, really. So I was going to ask about what was specific about that time in terms of that made it a good time to set it, but I think you sort of answered that with the kind of
I think the peelers aren't, the police haven't arrived yet. One person has a gun and it seems to be like a bit of new tech. So there was still a sort of lawlessness, I suppose,
yeah
that you just that I was thinking a lot about the Wild Bunch when I was making this, and just the idea that, especially for Tim Roth's character, the idea that he's outlived his time,
yeah
and things are changing, and he's frustrated that people can't just take the law into their own hands. I'm going to take this, but I'm also going to not have this stolen from me.
yeah
And he's going to die because in 20 years' time, that's all going to be over and done with.
yeah and there's a kind of class element in that, isn't it, as well, because the film sort of starts with this kind of scene that unfolds on land that obviously has been stolen by people who can keep it, but that
It was even an element with the big house, that the floors are a bit crumbling, or
oh yeah, I love that.
empty, it's not just rich happy days for these people either.
No, the National Trust haven't yet bought it.
Yeah, exactly.
So what part did research play in terms of like the character of Tornado and the kind of that traveling troupe? Because obviously it really feels, I think it's part of a kind of growing, kind of number of films, a lot of which are kind of like traditional period ones, but looking at, correcting the narrative that, that there were no people of other ethnicities or other colors having kind of significant roles in the UK up until the Windrush. But it doesn't. It feels like not authenticity is the wrong word, but there's certainly a kind of there's a richness to it, which just feels like this is based on knowledge, not necessarily of specific individuals, but of cultural practices more.
Yeah, I think it's about, first of all, wanting a sort of troupe that wasn't flame blowers and sword swallowers and tattoo people. It was supposed, there was a sort of Bergman-esque, watching lots of Bergman films, looking at, people that are more just outsiders, your poets and your painters and your performers. But so there was an idea that there were more just people that couldn't get a job in a town, and have just all banded together as kind of outsiders, which reflected maybe the posse as well, the bandits. So and then it just becomes about not looking at kind of cliched photographs or imaginings of the time where things are almost been Disneyfied slightly. Just thinking, well, what, how would they get, what would happen to this wagon if it was sitting here, and the wheel had come off? They just paint a wheel on a box and shove it back on, rather than actually make a wheel, sort of, and just allowing my imagination. I was just on and on and on at the production designers to sort of make this a little more almost like 1790s Mad Max,
Yeah.
then, this has all just been found and bolted, then getting a sort of, and it was the same with the costumes, rather than just hiring a 1790 costume, these people have just collected scraps and made things up, and, again, the outsiderness of it all.
Mm. Yeah, you mentioned the production designers there. It felt very sort of close to Slow West in terms of the interest in landscape as well. So like obviously, wanting to shoot something that far period requires certain types of landscape. I wanted to talk about your approach to it, and obviously working with Robbie Ryan again in terms of. I mean, it's a beautiful looking movie, but obviously, like the landscape is such a key part of that. So a little bit about that would be great to know.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted it. I didn't necessarily want it to be Scotland. I wanted it to be generic Britain. So it could be Cornwall, or it could be the Lake District, or it could be the Highlands, whatever. So we found a place that just felt windswept, and that was the sort of idea that the whole film, like the word tornado, the whole film is windy, and we did find that in January in Scotland. But and Slow West, because I didn't want to sort of I didn't want to sort of make a cliched Western, and I thought that Leone and Morricone had sort of done it all in terms of widescreen Western, that I made Slow West more letterbox, more 16:9, sort of squashier.
Yeah.
And that made it kind of more intimate and smaller feeling. But because of this film being set in Britain and not being a Western, I thought I could get away with maybe shooting it like a Western and starting using more of the Morricone influences and Leone influences. And so, yeah, there was an element where this is probably more influenced by Westerns than Slow West,
Yeah.
But, yeah, and then shooting in January was very tough because the light disappeared at 4:30, but it was actually the best time to shoot it, because when all that stuff goes green in Scotland, it becomes a bit golf coursey. So, you're still getting all those browns, and so it was the best time to shoot it. And luckily we didn't get snow, because that would have screwed continuity. So, yeah, and then Robbie just deals with the light because he's a master of light. So whether it's natural light or he's got a few lights in the woods or whatever, I just absolutely leave that to him.
Yeah. And it's interesting to hear you talk about some of those sort of reference points. Because obviously you start with a quote by Arseny Tarkovsky, and it's certainly the wind and the landscape. You've certainly got those kind of Tarkovsky-esque vibes, but they're nothing's really obvious, So I wondered, like, what are the other things you were drawing on? I think Bergman is interesting, and there's certainly for me, like Dead Man, Jarmusch's Dead Man feels like it's got a kind of spiritual presence in there.
Yeah, I think there's little things like the Tarkovsky, when you start shooting through like bits of broken, burnt foreground, and so there's little nods to Kurosawa and Tarkovsky in terms of framing, Bergman. And then in terms of sort of vibe, I suppose Night of the Hunter was a big one. Kind of that kind of slow chase, of Night of the Hunter or The Wild Bunch, or where things, your enemies just sort of plodding after you and you can't escape them, and I think, let me think. I mean, there's so much. When I'm writing the script, I just watch, 1,000 films, and some of them will be references in framing, some of them will be references in character, some of them be references in casting, some of them, so it all just, I think that's why it becomes something else, because of the sheer number of influences.
Yeah. but also becomes its own theme.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then in terms of, I'm just trying to think, Kurosawa was probably the biggest influence in terms of let's just stick to character and not deal too much with exposition and not have too much dialogue, and let's show and not tell, and let's keep it all,
Yeah.
an idea of having an action film like the action films he used to make that are kind of done with smarts, and a sword fight is one swoosh. It's not like a 20-minute battle, So
Yeah.
all that I think comes from Kurosawa probably.
Yeah, there's an economy to it, which is really kind of beautiful.
Yeah, Bresson as well. As always, me and Robbie always talk about Bresson when we're shooting because of the economy.
Yeah.
And I think that comes from, well, loving that style of cinema anyway, and then also just not having the time. So, I draw the storyboards, I shoot the storyboards, and that's it. There's no coverage. So you don't end up relying on an editor can't choose to sort of play things out in a more of a television style way. They're forced to sort of, okay, we've only got this one shot of a hand and then one shot of a face, so we have to use both of those separately.
Is that one of the benefits of, taking a long time to develop stuff in terms of like honing that, because obviously there are, I'm sure it's frustrating trying to get stuff off the ground, but does it, is that a fulfilling part of the process, coming back to that design of it?
It does help because, I had to redo the storyboards about 3 times because of diminishing budgets and other reasons. So, it meant that by the time we were shooting, I didn't even need the storyboards. I remember them all. So, yeah, it was a very fast. We were working at such a fast pace. 35 setups a day was our average.
Wow.
It was full on, and we shot the whole thing in 25 days, which I think, it's pretty good for what the amount of stuff that goes on. So, and it being dark at 4:30. So yeah, it was, but the energy sort of, I don't know if I would have done anything differently with more time, to be honest.
Yeah.
The energy was high, and if I had more time, actors would start waiting around. It was cold. It was, people would start getting, but the fact that we were just doing one take and moving on, it kept the whole set happy in a way.
And it, yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I think it's interesting to see some of the creative results of those kinds of sort of production challenges, and I think there is, like you say, there is a slow chase movie, but within the performances there's this kind of urgency, particularly in Jack Lowden's performance, where he's kind of he just wants to be, he wants everything to be quicker, and it works really well in terms of that tension.
Yeah, that's good, because that's just all down to him, really. I never would have said that to him, but he just, like all good actors, you have to say very little.
Yeah, I mean, all the performances are absolutely superb, particularly in in terms of the lead. It's a very demanding performance because of, one of those kind of, you've almost created the classic arc of a character in terms of like them realizing so much and sort of coming into their own, but in this kind of very, very genre context.
And in a short time, in one day,
Yeah.
She was, and of course, you're not shooting in sequence either sometimes, so she was just brilliant, incredible.
Yeah, amazingly sort of capturing a lot of those themes. The other thing I loved in terms of the creative results was the stunt early on. I just loved the way I actually flipped it back because I just loved the way it was shot. I thought it was absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, it was funny because the other day I watched Rush Hour with Jackie Chan. Oh, you've frozen. Oh, you're back.
I'm back, yeah.
Did you catch that bit?
No, start again, sorry.
I said the other day I watched Rush Hour with Jackie Chan. And then you froze. I thought it's the wrong thing.
All influences are important, John.
And well, this was after I'd made my own. Probably fortunately, because basically there's quite a good falling through a floor, you know, and it was done in, you know, 5 shots and you saw everything, you know. And mine's done in 2 shots, you don't see anything. But you know, again, it's maybe something, the lack of money sort of ended up helping a little, you know, ended up being interesting anyway. You know,
Yeah, I mean, it's
see
just
fall, you know.
yeah, it's such a cinematic thing where, and then obviously there's I won't say, but there's a really great line just afterwards, you know, which just sort of, that's the payoff for the visuals. I think it just works so well.
Yeah, I mean, that's the collaboration of film, because for a start there wasn't the money to, you know, in the script in the beginning it was across a beam that, you know, that the piano's below and she can see everything, and you know, and he falls off the beam, but you know, it cut down and got cut down and got cut down, and then I think it was the stuntman said the idea of the smoke coming out, the stuff coming from under the door, you know. And I love, you know, that he earned his wages that day, you know. So yeah, it's just about the collaboration and someone just coming up with something going, great, I'll nick that.
And yes, but that's the beauty of it, isn't it? That it's all it's people using their talents and experiences to enhance everything at every stage. And it sounds like it sounds like you create a great environment for that, in terms of you kind of inviting that in a way.
You try, you know, that's the sort of tightrope, because you can't open it all up and give anyone any sense that you don't know what you want, or you know. So it's the balance of kind of showing you're in full control and knowing exactly what you want, but allowing people to come up and, you know, solve a problem.
Yeah.
Not even make a suggestion, but solve a problem is always brilliant when someone comes up. And sometimes I say, we can't do it because of this, and other times I say that's a great idea. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, so there's that line which just made me laugh a lot, and then but then there's others where, you know, you kind of get to some pretty serious, you know, there's you know, it's not, and I just wonder about that balance and how that comes out. I mean, obviously that, you know, particularly when you're sort of saying about the edit being limited.
Yeah, I think the script was slightly more tonally mixed and slightly funnier in bits, and more surreal, and a bit more sort of, there was more elements where things were kind of off, you know. And I think in the edit it sort of detracted from tension. So it took, you know, exec producers or producers or other people to sort of tell me, because it's very hard when you've written your own script and shot your own film to then, you know what's working and what's not working in the edit. I find that really difficult.
Yeah.
So the cut that really started working great was when some of that was reduced, you know. So now, you know, and I think what you end up with is, you don't want too little, because then those things that are still left stand right out, like a funny moment in a very serious film, or a very serious moment in a comedy, but then, you know, never again, you know. Or, you know, it can be jarring. But I think that for this, I think that the way that the edit went and the way that the story unfolded needed that kind of slightly more serious, intense. It needed to get to a more serious, intense place.
Yeah.
In Slow West.
Yeah. But again, that seems to speak to the importance of surrounding yourself with people who have a kind of cinematic or filmic understanding in terms of how do you do that.
Yeah. No one made this film less cinematic. That was the beauty of this process. Everything was from Tim Roth taking out dialogue to the editor using a long shot rather than 3 close-ups. It was all adding to the cinema of it all, to the soundtrack, to the way we use sound and the music, very much in a cinematic way. Yeah, just that was the beauty of the whole process.
Yeah, that's great to hear. And you're definitely
Yeah, and that's actually tough because people are slowly getting less used to that language and more used to the language of television. So they want more fleshed out characters. They want more sort of history of everyone. They want more, and that's just that TV thing, isn't it? Where things are just, I kind of disagree with a lot of what's happening, even in, for instance, James Bond, having a childhood or being able to die, or all these things that I think the wrong kind of writers might think this makes this person more interesting to the audience. I think it makes them, less interesting.
yeah.
So, I do hope that people can still read films in the same way as you read a sort of Good, the Bad, the Ugly, and you don't really know who these people are, and the only way you know who they are is how they react on screen.
Yeah, they're defined by their actions that when you see them.
Yeah. So that's my piece on all that.
Well, no, I appreciate it. It definitely ties in with stuff that we talk about a lot, which is this idea of the cinematic and all those things. And I, working in university and sort of teaching film and screenwriting, that's a battle in terms of
It is.
Where just young people as students are kind of coming from in terms of what they're expecting to have to do, and like sort of saying to them, no, actually, you can put this in the form. You don't need in exposition.
It's not about taking out dialogue. I think that I love dialogue, and you can have a ton of it. It's just what kind of dialogue,
What's the dialogue doing?
Are you asking the person to listen to this the same way as they read a book or an audiobook? Or are you just are you just saying to the audience this person's talkative? Or there's just so many ways to sort of, that's how I kind of feel about it.
Yeah, last week I was in Amsterdam last week, and I went to see Hiroshima Mon Amour.
Yeah.
And it was obviously it's in French and Japanese, and it had Dutch subtitles. So a couple of people I spoke to like, well, why would you see that? And it's like because I was pretty sure going in that the film would work, even though I didn't understand what they were saying necessarily, and it really did. Like editing, composition, performance, it's all there. Which means that Marguerite Duras's script is obviously wonderful, but it's a part of the whole. The dialogue works as in collaboration with the other formal elements, not just as information.
Yeah. So there was a lot of trying to reduce the dialogue in this to the bare minimum anyway.
Yeah, so it works when it kind of, but not in a kind of, it's not soundbitey, it kind of, it adds a weight to it. And it is, to be honest with you, it is really encouraging to hear that despite the challenges that you can still surround yourself in sort of, British production with people who get it and want that to be the outcome,
Absolutely. Everyone from Robbie to Lionsgate, are fans of cinema.
Yeah.
So
hopefully audiences respond as well.
Yes. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, we don't have to go there, John. It's all right.
No.
You've done your bit.
Word of mouth.
Yeah, well, that exactly, and and I think that's why we keep doing this, really, is so that there's those kinds of conversations taking place. And I wanted to talk a little bit about kind of how the themes emerged in terms of, because there is obviously the family stuff, but there seems to be, and I think which is one of the things that's kind of sort of striking about it, is this very contemporary idea around, well, capitalism. It's almost got that kind of like first cow feeling of like before the shit goes down, that these tensions around property and capital are kind of still there. And you know, whether they were things that you noticed as you were writing, or you know, and how the kind of, I think particularly the end, sort of the last act with what she does, both in terms of, you know, the gold that is at the heart of the story, but also this kind of real explosion of kind of violence against everyone.
Yeah, I think that the nice thing about keeping the film, the doors open to is that people can read a little, you can go as deep as you like, you know, and I think that my idea was probably starting off with, you know, greed, the idea of greed, and the idea that, you know, money is relative, it's a sort of, money's a metaphor for how hard you work for it, or, you know, and it's a kind of weird thing of, you can just steal it, but it has a different value, you know, so then if you you know, if you worked, you know, I find it in my own life, if I, you know, I can do teaching at a film school for a week and earn the same amount of money as I might do DJing for 20 minutes, you know, and that, the way I sort of view that money is sort of different in a way.
Yeah,
Like
interesting.
one's more valuable than the other.
Yeah.
I-
Yeah, that's and that is in there in the heart of this film,
Yeah,
you know,
so
and
there's that, and the girl, you know, I sort of said to the girl, you should think of yourself as the villain in this film. And then I said to the Tim Roth, you should think of yourself as the hero, you know.
yeah,
So there's a bit of that going on because, you know, Tim Roth, he has stolen the money, but even that is from a church. So even that's sort of not clear cut right and wrong. He hasn't stolen it from an orphanage, you know. So
yeah,
um it feels like the youngsters, and this might be another contemporary comment, that, you know, the youngsters want it quick, you know, they just want it all and they want it fast.
yeah,
And the oldies, you know, want to share it out equally and want it sort of, or realize that that's not going to work, you know. And
yeah.
so they all get punished, you know. But yeah, and so that's all there. I'm sure there's more, but I just can't.
Yeah. No, it's yes. Again, it's just it's nice to not you know, not to kind of, again, not to be televisual and define everything, but to just, you know, to trace where all this stuff comes in, because I think
Yeah.
sometimes there's a lack of coherence when there's so many different things, but you know, it all feels like it's of a piece here, and this, you know, that like so many great period films, it is about that time, but it's also about those universal things which
Yes.
we can't escape.
Yeah, it has to be, and that's the beauty of when you study the westerns of the 50s, 60s, 70s America. They're all about the time they were made, you know, like the 50s westerns had the shadow of the McCarthy, you know, trials. The 60s westerns had the shadow of Vietnam, you know, and the 70s, the hippie westerns, or the, you know, had the sort of lost generation feeling about them, so and more reflective. So yeah, no, absolutely. And then the 80s westerns are all like, you know, almost like cocained up sort of yuppie, you know, type
Yuppie
westerns.
westerns.
So yeah,
Young
it's,
Guns.
Young Guns. So yeah, no, it's sort of, you don't have to try too hard to do all that. I think it just happens.
Yeah. Again, with that kind of well, just being, you know, thoughtful, but also kind of committing that stuff to the page and then the screen.
But yeah, I think very much about the audience all the time, you know, when I'm writing, and you know, and I think you have to, because it's an audience thing, cinema, you know, so you have to think, you have to think about the audience all the time, because each scene you have to think, what am I telling them? What am I revealing?
Yeah.
And if you don't think of an audience, I don't know how you can write anything, because there's no one to sort of think, you know, how fast or how slow do I reveal this, you know, or how, you know, so because you don't have an audience. So yeah, no. And you know, I do love the idea that you know, you can tell this one story about a 1790s samurai, which none of the audience can relate to, or a world, and then within that world you put very relatable characters. And I think I was thinking about this, perhaps that's the thing about film. You can create a world that fascinates people because they know nothing about it, but then within that world you put people that every person can relate to. You know, I think Succession might do that. You know, it's we don't know what it's like to be super rich, but we do know what it's like to have an annoying brother, or, or a grumpy dad, or you know.
Yeah.
So I think that's something I'm very aware of, consciously or subconsciously, is just, you know, without either of those two things, something can fall flat. So
yeah, you need that blend, don't you? And like you said, but it kind of speaks to what's film's long-standing, or one of film's long-standing purposes, which is that going into the unknown, you know, and that's an unknown space, an unknown time, you know, unknown characters in terms of like what people are expecting to see, but then over the course of the film, yeah, like say finding those points of reference,
truths.
yeah, truths. So you still conceive it for a kind of, I guess, like a cine literate communal audience, and when you're kind of putting it all together, which
I,
you
I
know
wouldn't
you
even
certainly
say
could feel that.
literate. I wouldn't even go, you know, I would just hope. I think after the showing in Glasgow, the kind of selection of people that didn't know, a guy I talked to for a while that hadn't seen that many of the references, you know, loved it, because I think that, as you know, I don't think that people that are not cine literate just want to see Wild Wild West. You know, I think they do want to see interesting things.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I wouldn't say that, but I think, and then all the nods are there for for the people of varying cine literary expertise.
Yeah. Cool. All the nerds, be happy as well. But yeah, again, I think it comes from an understanding of genre, and like you say, all of those kinds of films that historically have done similar, be that Kurosawa, be that Bresson, you know, that there are. I always find that interesting when people sort of, you know, what the idea of what experimental is, that is kind of shifts, you know, and it's like, well, actually, you know, a lot of this stuff that is considered art house, you know, Bergman, for example, that there is plot and there is character. It's just the way it's kind of handled that is outside of that, you know, probably the very narrow idea.
Some of his films were mainstream though, weren't they? And some,
Yeah.
you know, and especially in his own country. And Kurosawa was extremely action mainstream kind of guy. You know, I think it just, maybe it's the black and white, maybe it's the sort of the fact that they're just slightly slower, or but they, you know, there's not that much of a shift from Ozu to Kurosawa to Spielberg and Lucas and
Yeah. No, and I think it's what, like you say, what's really exciting is seeing a British genre period film that's in conversation with that, rather than
yeah,
conversation with just the, you know, the expectations of British cinema, which would be, you know, traditionally social realism or heritage drama. You know,
that's a good one. Yeah, I mean, I was trying to think of the only two really loose references to this kind of British other Britain is maybe um either, what's it called, Jamaica Inn or something that's sort of slightly more outsider-ish, or Robin Hood, you know.
yeah.
But so yeah, I keep going back to Robin Hood.
Well, Prince of Thieves has got a nice international cast, so
yeah, I mean there is that, there is that.
But it's interesting because I remember at the time, there was like, the being young and people were like, oh, what's Morgan Freeman doing in it? Like this idea that and that's where the idea of the Crusades was interesting. It's a kind of we were an internationally active colonizer for centuries, so that flow of characters back in does it felt realistic. It felt,
really?
But for a lot of people it was like, well, surely we were just this way until here.
Yeah.
And in your film, obviously, you've got all of these nationalities and characters unexplained, and they feel like they are part of the fabric of the film, and therefore Britain in a wider sense than just not. And I think that helps that it's not specifically a year in Scotland, which
that's why I didn't write Scotland at the start. Yeah,
I certainly felt a little bit of Cornwall in there as well in terms of the landscape. So the film is out now-ish.
Oh yeah, because now-ish.
Yeah. And you're sort of on tour in your other guys later this year. But yeah, so how are you feeling about the film now? It's sort of done some festivals and had a little bit of sort of got a bit of a backwind going into release, and how has it changed what you might do next if you get the chance?
I'm looking forward to it coming out. I'm looking forward to the reaction may be mixed because it's because I'm trying to do something different. But I feel quite sort of bulletproof about it because I feel like when you get to make the film you want to make, then that gives you a kind of invincibility because, I wouldn't do anything different,
Yeah.
So that's very nice. So regardless of what people think of it, this is the film I wanted to make, so that's that. Not everyone can say that, because it is a tough, that can slip up at any moment, and
Yeah.
So very, very lucky in that respect. And yeah, just thinking about the next one. I mean, back to the blank sheet of paper.
Great. Well, it's been worth the wait in terms of like a rich movie, which was really exciting, and I hope that people do respond to it. And yeah, thank you. Thanks so much for talking to us today.
All right. Thanks very much.
Thanks to John for his time and for that conversation, which I really, really enjoyed. I brought John down to Falmouth after Slow West was released, and it's a similarly rich conversation for me, and hopefully the listeners around sort of filmmaking. So yeah, Dario, what did you make of our chat?
Yeah, I really liked it. I saw that John has been doing the rounds, and rightfully as well, I think. And I'm really glad that this is up everywhere. You can see it being advertised. It's on everywhere as well. I think I'm probably going to go down to Curzon Bloomsbury this afternoon and watch it. I might even do a quick audio visual response to it. But we, as we were saying off mic, you and I can have a chat about it when we meet up next week. And I'm glad about it because I really like Slow West that much, and I think it's just such an under-discussed film. And even from the conversation, you can tell here's a filmmaker that operates within genre, but understands the mechanics of how to play with genre in ways that are subtle and then can become original. Because everybody's doing genre, really, and everybody's doing the irony of genre. You know what I mean? Oh, we know that this is genre, and so it's really difficult, I think, to operate in that milieu, if you for want of a better word. And I think you could just hear the sort of ways in which he is informed by, the names that you would expect for him to be informed by, but there isn't that sort of sense of an offhandedness about it. You know what I mean? He clearly wants to take that, translate it into the context that he has done, and make something interesting in its own right. And I just thought it was lovely the way that he outlined how parts of the story and the character comes together. The characters come together. You know, that sort of brain of a filmmaker who understands kind of like narrative beats and mechanics. But then that's in the service of character. You know, because I mean, again, you and me, we I don't know whether we're on the same page with this, but I think it is slightly simplistic to I mean, a lot of filmmakers, particularly filmmakers that are writer orientated, are like, story is everything. You know what I mean? It's like, if the script isn't there, all it's going to be a bad movie. But you know, I think that the script is the scaffolding, but then the play within that and the resonance between the things is always interesting to me. And that idea of, you know, the immigration story and the sort of the idea of a samurai history within Great Britain, in the, you know, if we can call it that, really. And under almost sort of critiquing the period drama in Britain, kind of not directly, but you know what I mean? It's like, here's a story of outsiders, and Britain as we understand it historically is not just kings and queens. I like that idea of the sort of artists as outsiders as well. And he sort of mentions the people who couldn't get a job all sort of banded together. And it just really made me think about this idea today, you know, where the labor market is just like falling apart, and whose labor is valuable. And we're moving into this sort of digital feudalism. It's almost kind of like coming back full circle a little bit, you know?
That's really interesting.
Yeah. And I mean, it just made me think, I mean, I haven't seen the film, so I can't even sort of apply this to it, but it made me think of like what Slavoj Zizek says all the time, you know, with psychoanalytic Marxism, where our psychology is sort of driven by the materialist conception of history. It's like, where is our position in the capitalist framework? And you know, I mean, again, like I say, I haven't seen the film, so this might be a ridiculous thing to say. But yeah, I mean, it's just really nice to sort of hear a filmmaker who is able to kind of go across all of those ideas, I think, but without ever feeling like this is didactic. And you know, I think from your reaction as well, it's still a film. Do you know what I mean? It's like, I really love this. It's a samurai movie. It should be fucking good fun. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Particularly the last act, which kind of explodes in violence, is very, very satisfying. No, I mean, it's really astute as well, I think, and it does make me realize things that I'd felt about the film, but not necessarily articulate. And that idea, particularly of how it speaks to the current moment, you know, in the film, there is this kind of traveling troupe, of which there are kind of, sort of, you know, Japanese migrants who've ended up here. And what they do is, you know, is that they mythologize the samurai, and they create narratives, and, you know, it doesn't feel like they're not there to kind of realistically explain what feudal Japan was like, or what Japan contemporarily. So that's what it is. It's they're carving out a space based on their position and using the stories and myths in order to do so, in order to find a space in this. And everybody has their own, very, very specific identity. So it's understanding, even at that time, which is arguably true, that everything has a currency in terms of how you can turn it into a narrative that serves yourself. You know, and then what's interesting within that is that those fundamental principles that might underpin it are things that are at stake and get kind of messy in terms of particularly the intergenerational relationship to that story is really interesting.
It's a bit like the Billy the Kid stuff, isn't it? Where you know, the sort of creation of the myth and the self-creation of that myth, and also that sort of sense of that even the change into the sort of anti-hero position, where people are kind of like, you know, obviously he's an outlaw and he's being chased and stuff, but like the media kind of likes it and wants this sort of anti-hero to sort of succeed in a way. So I'm really looking forward to that. And the other thing, just quickly, was that sort of thing about references and how they can weigh down what you're watching. And I was just wondering about this with us as watchers, and like not just us too, but generally, we've talked at times about how you, as a film watcher, you can let things pass if you are invested in either the filmmaker or the genre or the particular style, and you will forgive like references to other things as a homage and somebody who knows the terrain of genre in that sense. But then if it's something you don't like, or you want to, you're making the choice to critique, that can suddenly become, well, there's no new ideas here. It's just, I've seen this before, over and over again. You know what I mean? I was thinking sort of the difference between our reactions to the substance, do you know what I mean? And the other films as well, where I've gone like, oh, well, that's just referencing that. God, this is just nostalgia. Why are we doing this over and over again? And I'm always thinking about my own level of hypocrisy in this, by praising the genres and the filmmakers and the form that I like when it does it. And then if it's Marvel or DC or whatever, and Easter eggs and all this kind of stuff, it's like, well, this is superficial bullshit,
No, I agree. And I think that's, I think it's just about being honest about the hypocrisy. It's always there. That subjective position is always there. And it is a case of where are you coming from, and how does any individual, and I think what's interesting as well, that for me, there are examples within, body horror or horror movies, in recent years where I've not felt the same way I felt about the substance. There's just something specifically about that one.
Yeah.
But I think what I tried to do, as I'd always tried to do, is just say, I excuse myself from this. These are the things I have a problem with. These are things in the way it's talked about I have a problem with. But, I acknowledge that it's entirely hypocritical, because I'll go over here and be like, oh, this is amazing. Look at that stuff. I think what's kind of different here is that, it kind of, and you mentioned it in terms of like, which obviously John talked about as well, in terms of like how it's engaging with something which hasn't necessarily had much of a kind of a variety, which is the kind of the idea of the British period film and what a British period film is. And that seems to be changing a little bit, particularly like heritage period, not necessarily like the 80s or 90s or whatever, but certainly kind of like a longer past. And as with everything, there are things that don't work and there are things that aren't going to work for other people, but it's kind of like meeting it in terms of my sensibility and its sensibility, I think is really, really important. And then saying, this is not something that I think is bad. It's not a quality judgment. It's just like, this is how I can get on board with it.
No, and that's all you can do, really, isn't it? And then sometimes it sort of boils down to what intuitively sits with you and hits with you in a certain way. And I think more and more that's kind of the case. I mean, we're just talking about it in terms of like TV shows and stuff like that. It's like what appeals to you, and at times it's quite difficult to kind of intellectually schematize that. It's just actually, I'm kind of enjoying this,
Yeah, but also I think it's a testament to curiosity and good faith. I think that both of us could have not watched any more Star Wars.
Yeah, easily.
Do you know what I mean? But it's like you hear certain people talk about it, and you're like, oh, actually, okay, let me see for myself. Because I'm not shut down to the idea that these things can't be interesting to me or in a way that I think is interesting more broadly.
Yeah.
And obviously me, screaming on this little podcast about Marvel and DC has no impact. Superman is on its way thanks to James Gunn. Again, but it is about, again, using all of these experiences to work through how I actually feel about things. And then all of that does, and this conversation helps me understand, okay, what do I actually like about this?
Yeah.
And that's the conversation around it is really important, regardless of where we stand on it, because it helps me see things I couldn't see before.
Got that.
That's why these conversations with the filmmakers I find so enriching. Because I'm talking to John and like I feel this stuff. Is this in me, or is that in him, or is it both? Or where do these things sit? Are they just the things that happen when anything gets made and a space is created to engage with it, or are they intentional? And I don't want them all to be intentional. I don't want any of them to be intentional. I want to have that conversation, and then this conversation, like the layers of conversation that come out of it.
Yeah, that new Superman looks terrible.
Got some tomato instead.
No, but that's what I mean. It's like, oh no. And that, because I'm like, I'm sort of like, I'll go back to Christopher Reeve any day of the week and watch that movie. And it's like, and even the first sort of Cavill one is okay. It's not, but it's okay in the grand scheme of things. But oh God, just looking at even the trailer, it looks so bad.
Yeah. And I think knowing the difficulty it's taken John to make this film, the number of years it's taken and the development stages that it's gone through and the challenges that we know he's had in terms of actually the production and everything like that, and just in terms of getting this film on the screen. And then you see that and you're like, could you not just have made that for a little bit less? It would still be as rubbish as it's going to be, just a little bit less. And could some of that money go to these filmmakers as well? We can still have an average superhero movie that costs maybe 20 million less, and that 20 million was spread amongst other genre filmmakers. Like, that's what's frustrating, is like that, there's a reality for a filmmaker like John who's really trying to make distinctive, enjoyable entertainment, which is thoughtful, in a world where it goes without saying we're going to have another superhero movie, and someone who's already made 3 or 4 just gets the chance to make another one and kind of mess that one up as well, until the next someone tries again in 5 years. And yet John's not been able to make a film since like 2016, nearly 10 years, and a lot of the people we talked to on the podcast are in the same boat. That's when I get angry about not at James Gunn, not even at that idea, but just at how it's delivered just really, really kind of irks me.
Yeah, I don't know. It's because there's on Substack, there's a lot of independent filmmakers who are talking about, a complete rejection of any kind of centralized studio-based support anymore. And again, I don't know particularly the details about how much and where the funding has come from and what the development issues are, but you can tell it's been a lot if it's been 10 years since you make something quite original. But it's like, again, one of the things again, I think that, and this relates to what he was talking about at the end of the interview, where he was talking about the idea of film language a little bit, and the reading of the cinematic in something. And I'm really convinced that this is going now. This idea of understanding cinematic language, not requiring or having films that are made that are not beholden to psychological realism, in the sense that, story and character are all that anybody's really concerned about. Can we get the next piece of information so we can get to the end of this bloody film? It's like, no, this looks amazing. There is, subtlety here. There is symbolism and metaphor going on. The camera is placed in a particular way, you know what I mean? And a zoom or a pan kind of signifies, like, that is kind of like really waning, I think.
Agree. Yeah.
And it's difficult to see how you come back from that, I think.
Yeah. That is hard. That just reminds me of what I was saying I was going to respond to earlier when you were talking about, the narrative and the screenplay and stuff like that. And, we say story now, but a lot of time what people mean is backstory and information and justification.
Yeah.
And I'm always drawn to that line that Sidney Lumet writes in Making Movies, where he talks about dialogue particularly, but sort of writing character, and says like a character should be clear. A character, like, you should be clear from their present actions. You should know this character from what they do. And arguably it should make you sit with it and be a little uncomfortable, because you don't really know how you feel about what they do. And then over the course of the film, you have that's all you need to go on. Like, that doesn't mean that backstory isn't a factor, but it means that
who was the biggest proponent of that in the history of cinema? Fucking Hitchcock, who everybody rates as, if not the best director, one of the best directors of all time. It's like, he didn't really give a toss about backstory. It was like, what do these characters represent in terms of their actions to the story, and to that sense of the action as the thing that you're watching and the thing that you're interested in a present sense,
Yeah, and I think a lot of it comes from like just the audiences worry about what they're going to have to say about it outside of that. So where do they sit? And it's like, this doesn't matter. Just engage with what's happening in front of you. And it's, in the case of this, actually quite interesting and enjoyable. And that, I think you're right. I think a lot of that not just the film, not just, I think that there's a kind of tool thing. I think there are ways of watching that are being lost, critical engagement, as well as, and I think it's harder to have those ways when you're not being confronted with as many opportunities to do that work. Interestingly, because people's idea of a film is information and a very basic visual language which just delivers information.
And half the time they're not paying full attention anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway, on that bombshell of hope and joy. No, I mean, to be honest, it's great that it's out there. And please, if you are a film person, go and see this movie. It's a goddamn samurai movie set in sort of medieval Britain.
Like, I mean, that as soon as I saw that, I was like, sold.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Tim Roth and Jack Lowden, sold. What more could you possibly want? And it is, it's great, and I really, really appreciate John spending time talking through it, particularly in busy release schedule. Thanks to him for coming on and sharing that time.
Cool. So that'll be it for this episode. What have we got coming up next, Neil?
The next one will be my conversation with Ryan Gilbey about his new book, which has just come out, which we're going to take when we meet each other in London next week.
Yes, very much looking forward to that. So until then, thank you very much for your continued support. And this has been the Cinematologist Podcast. Thanks for listening.